This week in class, it was very different from any other week, reading my classmates' responses, because of the fact that they were responding to my selected media in my discussion posts, or in my discussion questions on Grace and Frankie. I enjoyed reading what my podmates had to say about the show and the concept of ageism within the show. In addition, I also enjoyed seeing what my other classmates chose for their selected media and what community they wished to represent this week. One thing that really stuck out to me comes out from Olivia's response. She said that in terms of representation, she thinks the issue is demand from the consumer, demand for what the producers think the consumers want to see. Because Netflix viewers tend to be of the younger millennial or Generation Z age range, the producers aim to make shows that will interest those specific age groups and those specific viewers. However, I'd like to play devil's advocate to this idea or opinion. I'm 22 and I recently just binge watched all of Grace and Frankie on Netflix, and I fell in love with the show and the characters and the ways that the characters represented. So just because I'm 22 and in a much younger generation than what is represented on the show, I'm not supposed to enjoy Grace and Frankie. I would also like to point out the fact that I asked my classmates which aspect of this show, either the older generation and the issue of ageism or the LGBT community and the issue of representation with them, which one of those they were more drawn to. And all of my podmates responded with ageism, despite the article that I linked to my discussion posts, the article on why I should love Grace and Frankie but don't yet, and what it has to say about being more drawn to the relationship between Robert and Saul than with like the girls or the women and the ageism issues within the show. Clearly, people of the younger generation, as seen by the people in my pod, and all ages are interested in ageism and the lack of representation older people have in today's media. And while the show is made to better represent women of an older generation and age and ableness, I still very much enjoyed the show and all it had to offer because of how different it is from anything that I typically watch now. The issue of ageism is something I haven't had to deal with because of my younger age and all the opportunities the world has for people of my generation. So why do I find the show so intriguing? I think it's because of the education and the knowledge that I gain from the show and the different perspectives it presents to its viewers, and I think it presents a lot of different representation of different minority communities than just the typical sexualities and different races that are often represented more than ageism or ableism in today's society. Olivia also mentioned that it was interesting that Grace and Frankie was created by the same person that created Friends, and that it was surprising because of the lack of representation in Friends. However, Ari saw things very differently, and she said that she believes the treatment of minority groups in Grace and Frankie still isn't that great. I found this interesting because to me, Grace and Frankie does such a great job with representation of all groups, with older people, with LGBTQ people, with people of different races, and many more different minority communities. And maybe I have a different view on this topic because I've seen every episode of Grace and Frankie so far. But nonetheless, Aria's opinion intrigued me and made me realize that we can never have too much representation, even in today's society where representation is everything. And to me, Grace and Frankie shows that Marta Kaufman, the creator of both Grace and Frankie and Friends, has educated herself and has grown along with society as the need for representation of different communities becomes more and more apparent. Addie brought up the fact that Grace and Frankie should do a better job at representing the LGBTQ community, and she brings up this idea from the Why I Should Love Grace and Frankie But I Don't Yet article, and the idea that the scene where the two husbands, Saul and Robert, tell their wives, Grace and Frankie, that they're leaving them for each other seems very, quote, clunky and weirdly unemotional, end quote. And this is a very good point that Addie brings up and that the author of the article brings up. The scene doesn't do much for LGBTQ representation. It makes the men seem selfish instead of portraying them as thinking about their families and the lives that they've created with their wives and how they're affecting the people in their lives. However, I think the show does a good job fixing this representation later on in the show and in the other seasons, where it's very obvious that both men feel regret and remorse for having impacted and treated their ex-wives so badly with the breakup and even in their lives together when they were still married to their wives. Maisie picked out the quote that, quote, the youngest and most attractive women have to fight for their place in Hollywood. Older women are practically non-existent, end quote, from the How Grace and Frankie is Changing How Women View Aging article. This line also stood out to me because how sad and full of truth it is. Even young women in the acting business have to work extremely hard to get to where they want to be and to get the roles they want and to get the roles that they want in the industry that they're in. And it's so much more competitive for women in the acting business that even the younger generations have a harder time finding jobs and finding roles. And then when you add age into the mix, it's even harder for those women to land the roles. So when women age, they immediately have an even harder time at finding roles. And then this brings me back to the misrepresentation of women in the media and to the unbalanced speaking parts that women have compared to their male cohorts in the film and TV industry. Because representation of women and the fact that their roles are usually smaller parts in movies and shows compared to men just makes it harder for women to land the roles that they want because they are being less represented in the media. And again, when age is thrown into this mix, it's yet again even harder for those women to land the roles that they want to. All of these responses to Grace and Frankie and my discussion questions were in favor of representing older people in the issue of ageism. And I think it's important for every community to be represented. In a society where representation and knowledge about different minority communities is increasing, it's just as important to recognize things like age and ableism as it is to recognize race and sexuality. And I look forward to the day when all minority communities are represented with an accurate portrayal so that the knowledge about each community can be expanded and can help more people understand who they are in the future. I'm excited to continue to watch my classmates' selected media assignments and their discussion questions. And I really think this assignment is a great way to see even more communities that need the representation, and I look forward to discovering those communities or to further my knowledge on those communities.